What do you use blocks for in yoga? In this video, I'm going to show you 8 different ways that you can use a block. This is going to help you increase your flexibility more quickly, build strength, and add variety to your yoga practice. Check it out. Hey guys, it's Dean. Welcome to Manflow Yoga. In this week's edition of the Yoga Fix, I'm going to be talking about blocks and how to use them. What are the different ways that you can make your yoga practice more effective, more challenging, and also just add more variety by using blocks. I'm going to go through 8 different uses and give you some examples of each of those uses. But before I get started, if you have not already subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe. We put out awesome content on a weekly basis, all with the goal of helping you get stronger and learn more about yoga. Hit the bell button and get notifications so you know as soon as a new video is released. If you like any of this video, if any 1 second of this video is helpful, be sure to hit that like button too. All right, so here we go. We've got 8 different ways to use a block, and these are all going to help you with increasing your flexibility, with helping you build strength, and with helping to add some variety and just add, some more spice to your yoga practice. Use number 1 is bringing the ground up to you. So this is a really useful technique if you're not super flexible. It allows you to bring the ground up to you so that you don't have to bend your knees and bring your spine into a compromised position. Usually people round their back too much, or they let their core disengage and it's just not there's not as much of a strengthening element to it. So using a block, we're able to bring the ground higher up. So for instance, in a forward fold, instead of me rounding my back to touch the ground, now I can touch the block instead of the ground and I can keep my back flat. And this means that I'm going to still be able to work my core in this position. It means that I'm not overstretching my low back and potentially causing lower back pain or discomfort. And it means that I'm able to increase my flexibility in my hamstrings more quickly because I'm focusing on the hamstrings and not on my lower back. We can also use the block to bring the ground up in a triangle pose. And I'm not going to go through all the poses here, but I just want to show you kind of the idea. So in a triangle, it's a similar concept because I don't have as much hamstring flexibility here or inner thigh flexibility. I'm putting the block on the inside of my foot, and this allows me to keep my hand on the block or have some support here while I straighten my leg and get this stretch in my inner thigh. So it helps so I have something to put my hand on, but it also helps because if I want to put my hand on the ground here and I don't have that mobility, I start to collapse through my upper body, right? And this means that I can't use my core as much, so I'm not getting as much strengthening out of this. So bringing the ground up, using the block, I'm able to keep my core engaged, build strength, and also work on that inner thigh flexibility. And it's not limited to exercises where your feet are touching the ground primarily. We can also use it when we're doing something like a down dog, right? So instead of putting your hands on the ground, we can put our hands on the blocks here, and now I can do a down dog. Even if I'm not super flexible through my hamstrings or my shoulders, I'm able to get a little bit of a lift. So that makes it a little more appropriate for someone who's not as flexible. So use number 1 is bringing the ground up to you if you're not as flexible as someone else. Use number 2 is to build more strength. And the way that we do this is by putting the block between our body parts. So you can put it between your hands, squeezing your hands into the block like this, overhead, out in front of you. And you can also do it by putting the block between your legs and squeezing there. Lastly, you can get creative and even push your elbow into the thigh and kind of hold the block here. All of these variations, they do the same thing. They help you increase your muscle activation. They help to build isometric strengthening. So it's really good for your joints because we're just adding a little bit more muscle tension. We're building more strength. We're building more stability there. And it just adds a much more effective strength element. If you tend to not use your glutes or you tend to not use your core or your inner thighs that much when you're doing certain exercises, we can put a block between the thighs here for a chair pose or a squat hold, and this allows us to get better inner thigh engagement, and that releases pressure on the lower back. If you want to add a strengthening element to an overhead movement, we can bring the block overhead, press it between your hands like this. So instead of doing a standing side bend where you're interlacing your fingers, we can push that block between our hands, and this helps to build more strength in your shoulders and your upper back. So those are just a couple of ways that we can do it. You can get more creative and find other ways to build isometric strength as well. The third way that we can use yoga to get stronger is by introducing different wrist variations into plank. So primarily when we're doing a plank, the hands are on the ground, we're in full wrist flexion, and the fingers are extended as well. When we introduce the block, however, we're able to introduce some grip strengthening element, and that's something that we don't really do anything of in yoga. So gripping the blocks, I'm able to actually flex my fingers, and even though my wrists are still extended, I can now engage my forearms a little bit more because I'm actually able to grip something with your fingers. So this is a really good way to build strength in your wrist without dramatically changing the position. So you can do this in pretty much any yoga class. You can have the blocks nearby and just grab onto those blocks. Especially if you have wrist pain when you do yoga, this is a good way to help get at the root cause of that wrist pain and avoid it. So that's number 3, is using the blocks for different wrist variations. Use number 4 is added flexibility in a restorative pose. So this allows me to go deeper into the stretch using the blocks than I would without them. Some examples are doing a child's pose with the blocks on the ground. So instead of putting my hands on the ground like I typically would for a child's pose, if I put my hands on top of a block, I'm able to get more shoulder extension, and I'm able to get a deeper stretch in my shoulders. You can also use it to take a traditionally active pose and make it into a resting pose. So a bridge is a really good exercise to counter a seated position. But typically with a bridge, you're holding yourself up using your glutes, using your hip strength. When we introduce a block, we're able to have the block hold you in place. So this turns this active exercise into kind of a restorative one. So I'm putting the block just above my sacrum, a little bit of engagement still through the hips to hold myself up, but mostly that weight is on a block. So I'm able to relax in this extended position with my spine, and this allows me to bring some balance to my spine if I've been sitting a lot during the day. So those are your ways to use the block to get a deeper stretch in restorative positions. Number 5 is simply using the block as a headrest. So I worked with a lot of people who spend a ton of time at their desks, who have kind of bad posture. And one thing that I noticed with them is that they're not able to get their head flat on the ground. So instead of being able to lie down and put their head flat on the ground, what tends to happen is they kind of end up looking behind them just because their neck is kind of stuck in this rounded position. So what ends up being more comfortable for them is having a block and just putting the head on the block like this. Now this allows them to not have to worry about their neck while they're doing something on their back. Makes it a lot more comfortable. They're not going to have their cervical spine in extension and kind of compressing the neck, but it allows it to be longer and a lot more comfortable. So if you have issues with lying down on your back and keeping your neck flat, using the block as a headrest is a really great idea. Use number 6 is using the block or blocks as resistance. So this is different from using it for isometric strengthening. This is actually using the blocks as a weight. So some examples of doing this, and by the way, you're going to want to have a cork yoga block for this as opposed to a foam yoga block. Foam yoga blocks are pretty light and they don't really add a lot of stability, and they're not great for resistance because they don't weigh enough. So with the cork block, you can introduce this element of resistance so that when you're doing something, maybe you're doing a warrior 2 where your arms are out, instead of just holding your arms out with your arm weight, we can actually hold blocks out. And now we can build a little bit more strength through our shoulders and our upper body. We can also do things where we're on the ground, where we hold the blocks up from a prone position. So one thing that I really like doing in my workouts is scapular stability work. So you'll get yourself into a position like you'd be set up for a cobra or a full locust. And then from here, you'd lift your arms up. Right, so your head is down, lift your arms up, forehead stays down. You can squeeze my arms up. But if you want to make that more challenging with more resistance, we can use the blocks instead of just lifting your arms. Now we can lift the blocks and we get a little bit more challenging of an exercise. You can bring them straight out, straight up. We can bring them out to the sides, kind of in a T shape with the body, and we can even do some internal rotation strengthening, bringing it along your sides, kind of like it would for a full locust. So there's a lot of variations that we can do there, but the point here is that we're using the blocks as added resistance to build more strength. Our seventh use for the block is as a seat. And this is basically the same concept of bringing the ground up to you, but it makes it more comfortable to sit on the ground if you don't have a ton of hip mobility or, you know, even a little bit of hip flexibility. So there's a lot of different ways we can use the block. So just think of any way that you would sit on the ground, right? We can do this kind of in a squat position like this. If you find that you want to use 2 blocks instead of 1 block, if that's more comfortable for you, you can actually stack blocks and do that. So we can use it here. You can use it in a traditional yoga seated position, which is crossing your legs. And this works really well because now my back stays flat. If I sat on the ground without the block and I didn't have a lot of hip mobility, what might happen is my back kind of pokes out like this, my shoulders round, and this is a very uncomfortable position. So adding that block allows me to not need as much hip flexibility to sit upright, and it's a lot more comfortable. We can do a lot of other positions from here. We can do a side seat position. So this is kind of like, if you're familiar with a 90-90 position here, I can sit on the block like this. You can do it where you sit on your knees, and you can put the block under your hips here, and now I can sit on the block in a kneeling position without having to bring my hips all the way down to the ground, which might be uncomfortable for your knees or your ankles if you don't have that much mobility. So use number 7 is using the block as a seat. And then use number 8, and this is the last method that I'll cover, is using the block to make the exercise more challenging, bringing the ground higher up. And we can do this in a variety of ways. So if we want to make a lunge more intense, or a greater hip flexion here, or greater hip extension, depending on which hip you're looking at, instead of doing a lunge with your foot on the ground, we can put a foot on the block, right? So now we're getting a deeper stretch through your hip flexors. We're able to get more hip mobility here. So we can do this. You can also use the block to stand on it and get a deeper stretch in a forward fold. So if you're really flexible and you want to get a deeper forward fold than just the normal reaching your hands down and bringing your hands to the ground, we can also stand on a block like this, and then we're able to go deeper into a forward fold because the ground is lower, right? So we're giving ourselves more of a challenge to go deeper into the forward fold by making the ground lower than usual. And then lastly, we can make this more challenging by standing on the block during balancing exercises. So this is a really cool technique because when you stand on one leg, what tends to happen is as you move the non-standing leg back, you have to kind of offset the hips because otherwise your foot kind of drags on the ground. So using the block is really cool because I don't have to worry about my foot touching the ground. I can hinge at my hips, I can go straight into an airplane, and I don't have to worry about my foot touching the ground. If I were not on the block, I would have to worry about kind of hiking my hip up and then letting my toes or letting my knee bend to get that leg back. So it just adds a little bit. It's a smoother transition for balancing postures, and it can also add some more difficulty. But I would recommend having the cork block to do that. All right, so those are my 8 uses of using a block to make yoga more effective. I've got a few other tips for you, so don't go away quite yet. And if you liked any of that, or you want to leave a comment, let me know about how you use blocks as variations in yoga in the comment section below. The inspiration from this week's Yoga Fix comes from my newest workout, the slow burn yoga routine for hamstring mobility and core strength. This is our newest workout in the Man Full of Yoga members area. It's part of my Strength Foundation's workout series program. You can get access at any time at manflowyoga.com/join. I'm also going to give you a wellness tip and share with you one of my own personal wellness habits or routines that I think you'll find interesting. So my wellness tip for you is to implement one change at a time. I know that when we're trying to be more healthy or we're trying to establish more of a fitness routine, we want to change everything at once. We want to implement an evening routine. We want to make sure that we're doing yoga one day and running the next and eating healthy all the time. But it's unlikely to create that much change and sustain it if you're implementing so many different new habits at once. It's much more effective if you implement one habit at a time. So try introducing one habit at a time. Do it slowly. Make sure that it's a habit, that you don't have to think about it, that it's manageable, and then you can work on implementing other habits. You've got your entire life to do this. It's much better for you to implement one habit per year than it is for you to try and implement 6 at one time and then fail within 2 months and not have anything to show for it. So one habit at a time. And then my own personal habit that I want to share with you is sitting on the floor. So as much as I can at my office, at home, I sit on the floor. And this is something that's really important for mobility and longevity. If you look at people in countries that don't sit in chairs often, they're able to get around, they're able to move, they don't have as many issues, they actually live longer because they're more mobile. And sitting in a chair is one of the most stressful or one of the biggest negative impacts on your overall mobility. So as much as you can, get used to sitting on the ground. Get into that side seat position that I showed you. Sit on your butt cross-legged. Sit in a squat sometimes. Use the block. Use the variations that I showed you and just get comfortable sitting on the ground without support. That's really going to help. Immediately, you're going to notice that your hip mobility and your core strength gets much better. You're not going to have as much back pain. You won't need to warm up as much for your workouts. You're just going to feel way better. And then over time, you're going to stay healthy. You're going to be able to stay more mobile as you get older and make sure that you're focusing on your longevity. So that's it for this week. That was the Yoga Fix. I hope you enjoyed that. If you liked any of that video, be sure to hit the like button if you haven't already. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell button, get notifications for when new videos are released. And if you want access to my other workouts and structured programs, check out manfulyoga.com/join. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.